Awesome. Good morning. We are now officially starting our session on the new conflict engagement styles and how to find a new pathway to resolution, one that's faster, one that's kinder, one that's a bit more human-centered. And I'm excited to share this with you today. So I'm going to be watching as people pop in and managing everything that's going on this end at the same time. So for those who don't know me, my name is Tammy Dunnett. I'm the founder and CEO of Relationship Revolution. We are working to change the way relationship is done, one conversation at a time. And what I'm going to share with you here today is stuff that's come out of my own experience, out of my research on lateral violence in the workplace, as well as blending communication skills in the education field with nurses to help them get resolution faster. So our three objectives today are simply to share with you why the old ways are not working and why they might actually be keeping you stuck. I'm going to give you two questions you need to ask before planning any approach to resolving conflict, and then how these new pathways can get you to resolution quickly and build more empathy. So with that, before we get into it, I think we really need to define what conflict is so we know what we're working with in terms of this model. Now, we know when we think of the word conflict, and I'm sure you're already thinking of all those moments where maybe you've had experienced or witnessed some angry shouting, perhaps some really restrained conversations, maybe some intense negotiations, hostile silence even, or physical fighting. And this is typically where our mind goes, is the extremes of the conflict when we're really feeling that reactive emotional state. But as we know, conflict can be in those little moments as well, and just those little nudges where something doesn't quite feel right. So we want to be really exploring the realm of conflict, but I want to give a definition so we're all working on the same path, and also to encourage you to think of conflict as a growth moment. It's a place where we're learning something new about ourselves. It might be a new value that hasn't surfaced. It might be a new desire that we didn't know until it was presented. But the definition I'm going to use is from William Wilmot and Joyce Hawker, and it's simply this: conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two independent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce rewards, or an interference of another person in the achievement of their goals. So let's first look at the old ways, because there's been some terminology that we've used for a very long time to determine a person's conflict style. And I think you're going to recognize these terms. So we typically look at people when they're interacting with conflict, and we use about 5 different terms. We mention that they're either an avoider or an accommodator. So we typically call those our non-assertive people. Maybe they're indirect. So these are the persons who are focused on saving face, maybe making hints, suggesting lightly, tapping around the issue. We have our passive aggressive. So this is our sarcasm, little digs here and there. Assertive communication, which has been labeled the gold standard, and I'm going to quote that on purpose. And direct aggression. So these are name calls, threats, those kind of things, intimidation. So we typically look at people's conflict engagement style based on these 5 categories. And here's why the old ways are no longer working. It's because we've become attached to our label and we don't see ourselves as being anything other than. So for an example, growing up, I saw two different styles. My dad would drink and become verbally abusive, so name calling. So he went to direct aggression. And my mom would gather the kids and hide in the bedroom, and she went to the avoiding. Those were the 2 things I saw in terms of conflict resolution. Neither of them fit who I wanted to be. So I had to train myself to become something very different. But in that process, I was very judgmental against both my dad and my mom in the way that they dealt with conflict. And I would think my mom was weak and a doormat, and I had no appreciation for her style of dealing with conflict. And I would think my dad was a jerk, to keep it mild and PG. And so I labeled them, and I didn't allow them to come out of those boxes and be anything else when it came to conflict. And this is partly what's happening in our workplaces, in our relationships, even with ourselves. When we take on a label, we assume that this is who we are, and we stay in that camp. And then we can't see ourselves as being anything other. So my mom, as an avoider, could not see herself being an asserter. But there are definitely times when I look back where she was an asserter, and I was impressed when she did stand up and speak her mind. An asserter, if you were to tell them that they were an accommodator, would probably feel like an insult, because we've made assertion the gold standard. And I'm not saying it isn't a great place to be, but there's more to having a resolution in a conflict than being assertive. And sometimes being assertive is actually contributing to the problem. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on those labels, other than to say that those labels have served their purpose. They have given us some context around how we can observe another person's style, where they might be. But the downside is we've left people there. And so if you are an asserter, you will think an accommodator, an avoider doesn't have the gumption to come to the table to solve it, because they're just going to avoid. So we start using this static evaluation language, these always nevers kind of statements, and it really prevents people from being seen as anything other. So what I want to share today is 2 questions that's going to help you identify the conflict engagement style. And engagement is about moving through conflict towards a resolution that feels good, right? And so there's only 2 questions you need to ask. I'm going to go to the board now. We're going to break down these pieces. Let me just get rid of that. All right, so we're going to come to the board now. I'm going to talk about those 2 questions you need to ask. Simply, are they in flight or fight? And are they talking about the issue or not talking about the issue? Those are the only 2 questions you need to ask to find out quickly where people are in conflict, where they are moving, it's movement through conflict towards connection. So the first, we're going to start here in the lower right quadrant, lower left quadrant, I guess it is. And we're going to talk about this quadrant first. So this is in the old style, this is where you would put accommodators and avoiders, is in this quadrant. The only problem with that language is we keep them stuck. They'll never want resolution. But I have never met an avoider or an accommodator who doesn't want resolution. They all want the tension to go away. And they tend to just keep pretending it's not there and masking, and they internally suffer, 1, because of tension, but 2, now they're self-imposing more trauma on themselves because they just don't think they can do it. But it's not true. They absolutely can resolve conflict. And so that's why I don't like those terms, because in society, we look at avoiders and accommodators as people who are unable, not wanting to, just can't do it. And so we don't even bother trying. However, what they're truly doing is they're pausing. The action they're taking is, time out, this is too much. I need to step back because I'm feeling a little bit too either emotionally involved or too at risk. And so I need to get out of here. Get out. You are familiar with this quadrant, and I want you to recognize that you are familiar with this quadrant. And I want you to find an example in your mind. I'm going to share mine as to when you took time to move away from a conflict and not talk about the issue. You can talk about all sorts of other things, but not the issue. So, for example, when I go to my husband's work parties, I don't know most of those people there, and it's really uncomfortable for me. Despite being, I think, quite an extrovert, others might call me an introvert, which is interesting, right? But it depends on the situation. So if I don't know anybody there and we're making small talk, and then they bring up an issue that might be something I don't want to talk about. Could be politics, could be religion. They could just be asking me something personal. And it feels now that there's tension. There's a scarce reward in the sense that, if I answer this, am I still going to be seen as somebody who is popular or respected or trustworthy? So what is it that I'm worried about losing? And why am I not wanting to engage in this conversation, or things that go through your head? But in pausing, I want to step away from it. I don't feel comfortable talking to a bunch of strangers about deep personal ideas, and especially hot topics, because I don't want to lose any respect of them. So I will move away. What is it that I need? If I were to stay in this conversation, what would I need? And ask yourself this question as well. You've got your situation where you have noticed you've pulled out of a conversation, you've moved away, maybe you're gone and talked to another circle of people, you've just decided to, you know what, I don't want to talk about this anymore, and you've changed the topic. That happens a lot. If people are changing the topic, they are definitely here. All right. Topic changers are pausing because they don't know what the next step is. What's missing is safety. We may have gone too far, too fast in terms of how deep of a conversation we've entered in with this person. And they're like, nope, this isn't safe anymore, backing out, changing subject, let's go somewhere else. The risk when we go into pausing, when we need some time and space and distance from an issue, is that we don't come back to the table. That safety isn't reintroduced. So someone might come back around to you and ask you those same questions about a really heated topic. You're like, you know what, I'm not ready to talk about this. We got to dig into that. We got to lean into that discomfort and say, you know what, share your example when you were in this quadrant. This is the path to engagement. Because you're familiar with this, you can say, yeah, you know, there are times I have felt really unsafe talking about issues that are so important to me. And I'm wondering if that's what you're going through. Open up the space to explore what safety means to them, because we will all have our own definition of what safe looks like. And that is where you bridge the gap. That is where you can say, if you're in any other quadrant, even in the same quadrant, you can be in the same quadrant and have tension with somebody. Recognizing that people who are stepping away from and not talking about the issue, they don't feel safe. And what they need to is to feel safe in order to come forward. But they have to tell you what safe looks like. So if you were to ask this question, you might be thinking, okay, when I was in this quadrant, when I come into this place and I feel uncomfortable and I back away, I feel like there's a risk to my ego, my reputation, my position, my authority, whatever that might be. And you go, what I needed to come back to was safety. And what did I need? You're going to have your definition. That is what you start out with as an opening statement. You know, I recognize that sometimes we just don't feel safe in certain conversations. And for me, what I need is for someone just to hear me. And I'm wondering if that's what I can do for you. They can say, yeah, I'd love to share my ideas, but then they might tell you, I don't trust you. Or I don't know if you can do anything about my situation. Or I don't know if you're the right person to tell this to. So I'm just going to think about this some more. They're giving you hints as to what they really need to be safe. So I don't think you're the right person. Well, who would you want to talk with if you could, if I could get anybody here? I don't trust you. That's an ouch. Get it? That's an ouch. So then you have to ask, well, what could I do to make myself appear more trusting to you? Or what is it that trust means to you? Or how did I break your trust? Have those conversations to understand what their idea of safety is, to bring them back to the table. Because if you cannot bridge safety, you will not get their ideas brought forward. So pausing is the movement through conflict. Now, this is good and bad. There are both pros and cons to this, right? So some of the pros are is that they're pacing themselves. They can observe things, take a step back and remove themselves from the direct intensity of it, and then come looking at it with a calmer thought. They can pick their moments. Right now that they've gathered all this information, they might be very strategic about when they share and what they share, quite likely because they're just testing the waters by giving little tidbits, but they can pick their moments. Another strength of someone who's pausing is that they may recognize that they have a skill gap. And if they can self-reflect to that point and they go, geez, you know, I'm really scared to share this and I need to practice this with somebody, they might find a safe third party to share their dilemma and practice things to build their skill set in order to come back to the table. So there are pros to this, right? There's a preference for harmony, for the relationship is the priority. My needs come second. That leads us into the cons. My needs come second. This is a self-sacrificing step to resolve conflict, to remove the tension for the greater good of the team at the cost of myself. That is where we start to worry about health, wealth, and relationships, really. What is their physical and mental health? Is this actually detracting and distracting for them? Is it creating more tension internally in that they're now starting to, you know, they've already been traumatized once by this tension that they moved away from. And now they're re-traumatizing themselves, maybe with some self-language, negative self-talk, like, oh, why can't I ever speak up? I just don't feel safe here. I don't think anybody listens to me. And then they start to get down on themselves. is this contributing to the negative health patterns or decreased productivity or whatever it is you're seeing in the workplace? And if that's the case, then we may need to have a conversation about how do we get you from needing space and time away from tension to coming back to the table and feeling like you can contribute because what you do is valuable. So that's one of the cons, is that they stay quiet and they never come back to the table. So this will then be they're camped out, right? So now they're sitting over here and they're facing outwards. We need them to look inward. Looking inward is where the solutions are. Looking outward only serves to verify our plan, our vision, our perspective. And we will get, if you're stuck in any of these quadrants, what you're doing is you're gathering information to verify what you think is true, and you're not looking inward to see what else is happening. Okay. So safety is what they need. Your mission is to find out what safety means to somebody who has pulled away from a conversation that's intense for them. And because you've been here, you've got your own example now, because you've been in this quadrant, you can start that conversation by offering up what you know. I know what it's like when. This is your pathway to resolution. Connecting with the person that they are in this moment, knowing that they are capable of all of this. And we are a blend of all of this. So let's go into the next quadrant. The second conflict engagement style is the person who is asking to understand. They don't have enough information. So what they need is details. I'm going to write this in black here so it stands out. And details equals certainty. I hope you can see that. I can't bring my computer any closer. Asking to understand is because there's a gap in knowledge. There's a gap in comprehension. There is a gap in skill potentially that they haven't been able to close. And so they're going to be asking, but they're not direct. In this category, remember, they are moving away from conflict, but they're still talking about the issue. This can happen in a few different ways. The first is that they go and talk to somebody else. Now they can talk directly to somebody else, but they're not talking to the person who needs to have a conversation. So they've taken this issue to a third party. The other way this can happen is they hint and they hope and they pray that you pick up on the clues in the environment that's telling you they're not comfortable. So what might that look like? Again, you're going to find your own examples to when you've moved away, but you tried to talk about the situation in a peripheral sense. Here's an example. Oh my gosh, look at the time. I got to get back to work. Really what they're asking is, how much longer are you going to be at my desk because I've got work to do? I need to reasonably plan out the rest of my day now because of this interruption. Same thing happens at home when you have people over at night, right? They've stayed too long, you start to clean up, you start to take their glasses to the kitchen and they go and pour themselves another glass of wine. They didn't pick up on the hint. And then we start to get more angry inside. So asking to understand is because there's a missing piece of information for them to get into action. And so the risk here is that they never go into action because they don't have enough details. They may want to plan for outcome A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, because they need to have all of that to be feeling certain. So people in this quadrant, what they need is details to feel certain about the next step. Now, again, think about a situation that you have done this, where you've been moving away from the conflict because the primary goal here is, again, relationship. You want to save face, which is why we're not directly saying, hey, can you finish this conversation because I need to go back to work now. We just don't talk that way. Or can you finish up that glass of wine because I'm going to go to bed in 5 minutes and I'd like to make sure I'm locked up after you leave. Take it and go. Right? We just don't talk that way in our culture. We haven't been raised, and you've been told if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything nice at all. Hence why we yawn and hint at people. And sometimes they get the hint. And when they don't, it can create more tension. And sometimes when they get the hint, they're offended that you couldn't be direct with them. All right. So hinting and hoping that you pick up on what they're sharing. I'm going to share with you an example from a nursing perspective here. This category can often be overlooked because when they joke around about topics, we like that. They're making our work lighter. If you've ever had blood work and it's had to be done multiple times over and over, in particular, in the hospital, we can draw blood a lot. So 2 or 3 times a day, we're drawing blood and the patient will joke and say, gosh, you guys are nothing but vampires. You're taking all of my blood. We joke around it. It's lovely. Yes, we are vampires. But what are they actually asking? It's about being present in that moment to say, okay, what she's really asking is there something wrong with me? Did you see something in the last blood work that I don't know about yet that you haven't told me? Should I be really worried? Am I really that sick? They don't have the details. They don't have clarity around the issue, so they can't feel certain about what's going to happen in the future. So they have a lot of internal tension. So details, certainty. Come up with your examples to when you were in this quadrant and write down what it was that kept you from feeling safe to come back to the conversation, because that will be your pathway towards resolution. When you find out that you're in conflict with somebody who's been joking around and hinting and maybe a little bit of sarcasm or passive aggressive comments in there, some digs, but not directly attacking the topic. And you can sense this when someone's talking around things, but they're not actually talking about things. You can connect with them and say, you know what? I think maybe what you're going through is a little bit of conflict here, and I maybe didn't pick up on it. But there was a time when I kind of felt like this, X, Y, Z. Is that what's going on right now? Create an opening for them to come into the conversation. So if we look at the lady with the blood work, yeah, I've noticed you joke around about this vampire a few times. I think maybe I've missed an opportunity to really ask you if you have any questions, because maybe I didn't share enough information. That's what they want, information, so they can make a decision and then move forward. Okay. So an interesting point here is that when we're in these quadrants, and remember, we do move through all of them, is that we have allies, people that we will go to when we are struggling, and people that we will not go to. The people who are directly across from you are the most likely to have conflict with you. The ones that you can find safety in are those who are right beside you, to the right or to the left in this model. So as a pause, or somebody who is moving away and not talking about it, if I were to come and have lunch with somebody who is an asker and understander, that might be a really good match for me because they can help me work through some things. They might just simply say, hey, I've noticed that you're kind of quiet today, and I'm not certain what's going on. I need more information here, but I'm going to ask you, how are you feeling? What's going on? Did you notice in the meeting X, Y, Z? And this might be a safe place for a pausing person to explore a little bit more about what's going on, to gain some of that self-awareness, and then maybe get them towards resolution. So remember this as we go into the next category. The next conflict engagement style is speaking and sharing. We are directly talking about the issue over in this side, and we're heading towards the conflict. This would be the gold standard, as we talked about before, the asserters. This is the quadrant that you would put them in. I have a problem. We need to talk about this. Strong I and we language, strong focus on solution, strong focus on the issue at hand. What they want to do, and again, think of the moment when you were in this quadrant, which if you are a proud asserter, this has been the label you have worn for a long time. This is the shift I want you to make right here, is that your needs to move through conflict are to speak and to share your ideas. This is your version of supporting the team and coming in as a strong ally. We want to step in. We want to be part of the solution. The risk here is that, I'm going to say we, because this is my dominant lean. This is where I go to first, is that we do not allow the space for others to feel safe to come in. When I speak, it's authority. When I share, it's the answer. When I have an idea, we need to go with it because it's going to work. This is what happens in the speaking and the sharing sometimes. And not having the space for others to come in is detrimental to the resolution process. So what do they need in this corner? Validation. When I'm coming to you with a problem and I have a solution, it's often what speakers and sharers do is they've thought about it, they've got the ideas, let's move forward, validate. Understand and recognize that they've put thought into this, that they've got some context that they've considered. Validate their ideas. Validation does not mean agreement, and I just want to highlight that. Validation does not mean ownership. Validation does not mean it's the right way. Validation simply says, I hear you, I see you, and I can understand what you're contributing. And it's important that you've had a voice at the table. You get to make the final decision as the leader. However, if you can validate a speaker and a sharer, somebody who's addressing the topic head on and talking about it, then you can drain them of their ideas. You want to keep asking, what else do I need to consider with your implementation strategy? What consequences should we plan for? Get everything out of them so that they now have space to hear your ideas, which will help them continue to develop their own ideas. This category is at high risk of being called a bully. Psychological safety can be overlooked here because they feel like they're contributing wholeheartedly to the solution, but they don't recognize that they actually might be viewed as a bully by somebody who's over here. When we have people who are pausing and moving away from, they need space and time, and the speaker needs to solve it. Let's get the solution. Let's knock this thing out of the park. Let's squash this issue. It can feel overwhelming to somebody who's in a pausing cycle, who just doesn't have that energy or that safety to really engage just yet. And it can feel like they're being pushed to do something they're not comfortable to do. So oftentimes someone who is in a pausing cycle will look at someone who is sharing and they might actually even label them as aggressive, as a bully, because it's just too far of a stretch from where they are currently to understand how this can be seen as something that's great in terms of solving solutions. Remember, we are a blend of all of these, and I'm going to share with you something in a moment that's going to rock your socks. All right, so the last quadrant is often overlooked, and we don't normally talk about these people. These are the ones who have a strong propensity to head towards the issue, but they don't have to talk about it. They're simply going to do. They're going to solve the problem. They know what they're doing. You've given them direction. They will figure out the details. What people in this category need is trust. And I'm going to change this to black as well, just so it's all the same. Doing, the movement through conflict and doing is that they want you to trust that they know, they understand the situation, they have the knowledge, they have the skill set, they can solve this, and they're just going to take care of it. So an example here is simply, maybe somebody's always complaining it's cold in the office. They bring in a space heater and they just give it to them because there's tension. They like it cold. They're too cold. They're going to give them a space heater so everybody's happy, but we don't have to talk about it. Okay, so that's why they're not talking about the issue, but they're solving the problems. They simply need direction and they need you to trust them. Now let's look at these two right across from each other. If I'm in the doing phase of moving through conflict and I happen to be paired with somebody who's in the asking and the understanding phase, there could potentially be a lot of headbutting here because the asker needs details. They don't have that certainty. They don't have the trust of what's to come. And now they're paired with somebody who's simply just going to take care of things. So the risk here in the doing category is that they don't slow down and they don't share details in order to allow this personal, this style, this energy of conflict to feel okay with what they're doing. So if they can't collaborate, if they can't slow down, if they can't share details and take that time up front, then the asker is not going to trust. And that's all the doing wants, is you to trust me. I've got this. I'm going to support you. It's going to be done in a few minutes and we won't have to worry about it anymore. So you can now see how the polar opposites can create more tension. Get your own story of doing when you have solved an issue without needing to talk about it, but that you were able to solve the issue quickly, or maybe not quickly, could have taken some time. I shouldn't say quickly, but you were able to solve it knowing that you had the capabilities, the knowledge, and the skills, and you just did. That is your pathway to connecting with somebody who's over maybe and asking. You can sense that they're stressed. They're asking for a lot of information. It's getting on your nerves because you're just like, just let me do my job. You recognize this quadrant because you've been here, and you can situate yourself going, okay, I remember the time when I needed to ask a lot of questions. You need some more information to help you feel like you can trust what's going to happen. What would be your top 3? Because you can't plan for their A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's just a little too much for a doer. You need to get situated and control that conversation as to what are your top 3 questions. If we could knock down those big dominoes, what would they be? Because often if we can get the big domino, then all the little ones will fall. All right. So now that you've got your own story, I'm going to share something with you. In every successful resolution, all of these are present. If you miss one, then the resolution may not hold water. I'm going to share a story here about how this was so important to the resolution and shifted the dynamic of the team. The empathy was richer, the collaboration was off the charts. My background is nursing, education, and military. So this is going to be a nursing example. Remember, this is my dominant, speaking and sharing. And in speaking and sharing also comes the laundry list of why you should trust me. There was a patient that we were extubating in the ICU, in the intensive care unit. And prior to extubation, all of our patients are good. They follow our instructions. They don't complain because they can't. And so we extubated this patient. I had no reason to believe he would be hostile, but as soon as the tube came out, he let me have it. Sorry, my nose is itchy. He must know I'm talking about him. He was cursing me out, swearing at me, telling me all the reasons as to why I was the reason he was in harm's way, knocking down the physicians, tearing down the hospital structure, like all the way up to the federal government. And there was every single layer was responsible for what he was going through. And as he was bashing me and tearing me down in his methods, in my mind, I'm in conflict, so I go straight to fight and talk. I'm already preparing my laundry list of reasons as to why he should trust me, why he should listen to me, why I did not do anything intentionally, and why I'm here to help him. And then something tweaked. Then something tweaked. I recognized, and this is a fabulous question for you to ponder. When the output doesn't match the input, that's a place to ask a question. Because as he was going off and I'm starting to prepare this list of reasons why he should listen to me, I'm like, whoa, that's not what I expected. Typically, when we extubate someone, they're always saying, well, thank you, I can talk now. And they're, very different in their personality. So it made me curious right away. And that was a fantastic switch moment, because as I was making that switch in my head that I needed to be more curious based, a nurse was walking behind me and she goes, if I was him or if I was you, I would just let him have it, as she kept on walking. And I was thinking, yeah, believe me, I was ready to. But I recognized that wasn't going to get us to resolution, because he was speaking and sharing and I would be speaking and sharing, and we would not be getting towards resolution because we would be butting heads on perspective. So that first thought of this doesn't match what I expected allowed me to park my thoughts for a moment, and I paused them. I went straight to the opposite. This is not my comfort zone. This is my comfort zone, but I had to go, whoa, something's really off here. I need to just suspend my thoughts for a minute, and I need to take a step back. I need to move away from the tension that I'm about to step into and just really take a moment to think about what's going on. So in this pausing state, when I moved away from the conflict he was creating, and I was being drawn into it. So instead, I decided to move away from the conflict. I didn't have to talk about what he was bringing forward as the issue. Instead, I got curious. I went from speaking to pausing, parking my perception, to asking a lot of questions because I was uncertain what was happening and I needed more information. So in asking him a lot of questions, I was able to find out that this intubation was very reminiscent for him of a younger day when he had broke his jaw and he was wired shut and he couldn't control all of the secretions. And when he would drink and stuff, he felt like he was going to drown on his own secretions back in the day. And this intubation reminded him of that powerless moment, how he was afraid. And obviously, we didn't do a good enough job reassuring him, talking to him, telling him about, because of the tube, we suction a lot, but he can't tell me when there's fluid there. So we just suction frequently to make sure that's gone. But by pausing and coming over here, asking questions, I was able to engage in a very different way. I ditched the laundry list. It's never needed. FYI, it's never needed as part of a resolution tactic, the reasons why people should trust you. And I was able to share with him an agreement on the fact that he wanted to go home. Because one of the first things he said is he wanted to get the F out of here and that we were his barrier. So once I got all this information, I could come back into this quadrant wholeheartedly and centered on connection with him and agree that our goals were the same. Our resolution was to get you home. I don't want you to stay here any longer than you need to be either, because personally, I didn't like being yelled at. So I was still in that mindset of, yeah, I want you to go too, but very therapeutically, our goals are the same. I want to share with you that my goal is to get you home as well, safely, so you never have to come back. Truthfully, I didn't want to see him again. We never want to see our patients again, but this one was a little bit, special. And from there, we were able to come into the engagement cycle. That's the E in the center. Because I took the time to go through these phases, we came into the engagement. And what happened then was we were able to set the parameters around what the next 4 hours would look like, what I would be doing for him, what he needed to do in order to let me know if there were changes. And then we got into doing the work that would get him where he wanted to go. Now, I will share with you, if I had taken my first strategy, we would have been angry at each other for the entire next 4 hours. He would have left angry and he would have had no more investment in the healthcare system than when he came in. In fact, he would have had less. He would have felt less trust, less safety. But because I went through this process, when he left, he was shaking the hands of every single person he passed. He was thanking them for their care and attention to his health concern. And his mother, so this gentleman was probably at 40-ish, his mother came up to me and she said, "What did you do to my son? I have never seen him like this. Never seen him like this. He's always been hostile to the healthcare providers because of his experience." And I said, you know what? I simply listened. Listening allowed me to get out of my dominant engagement style and travel through all of them to make sure I had every corner. And it is every time I look back at a conflict that has happened, that has resolved successfully, all of these are present. When they don't resolve successfully, it's because I've missed something. So I'll give you an example of when I've missed something as well. Again, this is my dominant field. So this is where I start. This is typically where I start. And I know this about myself now. And so when I am, sometimes conflict surprises us. Sometimes conflict we expect. Either way, I'm always going into the speaking first. So this conflict that came upon me has been actually in the works for several months, probably almost a year and a half. But the first instance that it was brought forward to me, it was a jolt. I didn't know there was an issue, and all of a sudden, blah, we have an issue. So I went straight to this. justifying my position. Well, this can't be true, and XYZ, and I think this is what's happening. And I never moved into these other ones. I just stayed here and justified why it was wrong. That conflict didn't resolve. 6 months later, same person, another jolt to me going, hey, here's what's going on and here's what I don't like about it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, again, right here going, I don't understand what's going on. We need to fix this because I blah, blah, blah. And I'm in the assertive mode, which is why I said earlier, this is the problem with these dominant, with the gold standard being assertion, is that we don't make space for the other places. We don't value the other pieces. We need to start valuing the other pieces because there's important strengths in each of these. So the reason this conflict has gone on for 18 months is because I haven't been able to switch into these ones with this particular person. And being assertive is not resolving the issue. In trying to get this person back to a conversation so I can actually exercise these other components, it's proving to be a little bit of work. And you won't always get people to come to the table. That is, something that needs to be said up front. But in attempting to do this full circle, I've not been successful. And so this is where we stay, two of us in this quadrant at odds, not resolving the issue. Now, she doesn't have the benefit of this knowledge. She doesn't have the benefit of understanding how this can work for her if she were to just set it aside for a moment, pause and park her perceptions, say to herself, something doesn't line up, ask some questions, and then we can share, and then we can execute and do the things that need to happen to resolve it. So this tool can also show you where things have gone wrong. I know in this relationship, it's because I've stayed in this cycle and I haven't in the moment been able to go, hold on a second. Can we take a step back? Can I have a few minutes, or can we reconvene tomorrow while I think about what you've just shared with me, because I'm feeling rather reactive. I'm in my fight or flight. That's, the first thing. We have that first thought we can't control, the second thought we can control. So I'm in that fight or flight mode, and it's hard for me to get out of that because it was such a jolt. And because we're both in this quadrant, that conversation is trying to be forced to be had, but it wasn't a good timing. So being able to step back and pause and find the strengths in this quadrant as we work through the different stages would have helped us to get to resolution. 100% guaranteed. So you can use this as well to identify, okay, what did I do wrong? Or what did I miss? Where's a place for me to grow in this relationship? And because I know I'm here, I need validation. What I could do with her is validate her. And I haven't even done that yet because I was so struck by the surprise that there was an issue that I couldn't even get into validation with her because I was with my laundry list of reasons why it wasn't true. So I know in that relationship, I failed to meet an opportunity to validate her perspective, to hear what she has to say, to drain her of everything she had to offer related to the tension that was existing, so that we could then move into another quadrant. That's missing. So I know in that relationship, if I get an opportunity, that's what I need to do in order to get into another stage. So this is also a great tool for you to understand, okay, what did I do? Why are they so angry at me? Did I just go and solve it? It's because I knew what I was doing, but they needed information, or they needed to have a conversation about it just to validate that I had thought about their ideas, and they needed to know that I had their back and they were going to be okay. I didn't share any of that. So utilizing this can help you get to resolution. All right. Now, let me just pull up my slides here to make sure I haven't missed anything on that. So if we think about those old ways I was talking about, let's bring this back over here. If we were to plot them in here, avoiders, accommodators, indirect, assertive, and aggressive. We didn't have anything for this category, so they were often overlooked, but this can cause some tension as well. The way to resolution is to get people to turn inwards and not outwards. So the thing we don't want is people camping out. And that's why I want to get rid of the old labels of, I'm an avoider. Sometimes people say that with great pride. I'm an avoider, or I'm an assertive communicator. great pride in those labels that they've hit the destination. But when we say that assertive is the gold standard, we are, again, remember, ignoring that the others have any value to contribute. And there is a lot of strength in each of these. So we want to switch our terms. So again, put those terms off to the side for a while. When you hear yourself saying they're an avoider, I want you to switch to they're pausing. Their movement through conflict is such that they need to move away to feel safe, and they need to change the subject. They need to talk to somebody different. They need to just say, sure, that's good, and not be part of the conversation. Recognize they're pausing, and what they need is safety. So explore that with them, have that conversation. What would it look like if we could make this safe for you? Find out what they need. And then if you can give it, if you can afford it, whatever it is that they're asking for, create the scenario where they feel safe, to bring them to exploring, to engagement, in order to find out what they can contribute to the solution. And when you consistently provide that, and let's just scale it back for a second. Even in defining what safety looks like and you offering it to them, it's going to take some time for them to trust it, because they have a propensity. This is their dominant lean. It's been trained in them growing up. And remember the story of my mom and the alcohol. That's what she did every time my dad was drunk. She would avoid, she would pause and get away from that conflict and tension because it felt uncomfortable. It was too much for her to bear. Very personal problem. And there's competing priorities in there as well. There's the husband relationship, there's the kids, there's the responsibilities as a mom. So where people go can often be a result of their priorities and values in that moment as well. But again, if they're pausing, I want you to switch your language from avoiders and accommodators. Move that terminology aside and say, okay, they're pausing. Pausing is movement. Pausing doesn't mean rigid. Pausing is that they need space and time to come back to the table and feel safe. So how do I make it safe? What's my contribution? What's my movement in order to create safety for them? Asking and understanding, this would be our indirect, our joking around, our hints, our sarcasm, passive aggressive can all fit in here. So when you find somebody who's like that, I want you to move those labels off to the side again and just say, okay, they're moving through conflict right now and they need information. They don't have enough to understand. They're asking questions, they're joking around, they're making digs because there's something missing for them. What is it? I need to be certain that we close those gaps to bring them back to feeling like they can contribute again. Speakers and sharers, this is typically assertive. Again, move that label aside and just recognize that their movement through their conflict engagement style right now is that they're sharing because they need to be validated. They need to feel heard, seen, and honored. Give them the validation that they are looking for, and then ask them if they can listen to others, because others might be able to help them solidify their plan. And if you're working with someone who's doing, we've never had a label for this, so simply stick with doing. Recognize that they are solving problems. They have the direction, you've given them the direction of where things need to go, and they're not sharing details. So if you're a leader and you've brought forward a problem, recognize where you are on this map when tensions come up, because you know you're going to go into a meeting and everyone's going to have their ideas, and everyone's going to have their worries, and everyone's going to have their reaction to the latest policy, the latest procedure, the new direction, the new training program, the new hours of work, whatever it is you're introducing. Before you go in, recognize your dominant style. Take a big breath. Leaders can have a whole host of reactions here too, but I was going to say, I'm going to guess that most of you will be in speaking and sharing, but that's not actually true. Many of our leaders have a lot of worry about how they're seen as a leader, and they can end up coming into the pausing and not actually doing anything per their employees' definition, because they want to make sure that people like them. So just recognize where you are, first of all. If you're a doer, you're going to have an expectation that the others are doers, and you're going to really struggle with somebody who's going to ask a lot of questions. But remember, you've been here. So the best thing you can do is, first of all, recognize, where am I before I go into this meeting? And as you share and others are talking or not talking, engaging or not engaging, recognize where they are. And maybe just Simply share the new perspective, leave the floor open for 10 minutes, and then take a 5-minute pause. In that pause, I want you to plot, where is everybody? Where was John? Was he talking about this topic or was he not? Was somebody making sarcastic remarks? Was somebody else joking and putting down like, yeah, this is going to be another thing that fails? Recognize what they need. Was somebody else like, yep, sure, and they're already starting to doodle and they're already starting to call people or whatever, emailing for resources? Recognize where everybody is on your team and know that you have the answers within you to bring them towards engagement. It will be work for you. It won't be easy at first, but because you know this side of town, because you visited all of these areas and you have your own personal example, you can now either divide people up accordingly. And so remember, the closest allies are the ones to the left and the right. So if you need to do some group work and you're recognizing that a significant portion of people are in this quadrant, in the speaking and sharing quadrant, we need to separate some of them out. And we may need to put them with some asking and understanding to help them be a little bit more detail oriented, to help them expose any maybe problems with their ideas. Put some speaking and sharing with those who like to do. This is going to be your biggest conflict though. And so you need to mediate this one most likely. You need to, if you're going to put speakers and pausers together or askers and doers together, there can be a lot of frustrations in those groups. So this is also something you can use to identify, hey, the personalities in this group that I'm having the most challenges with are such that we have askers and we have doers. No wonder there's a lot of tension because they're polar opposites of what they need. And so then how do we bridge that gap? How do we come back in and say to the askers, what 3 things do you need to know in order to be effective on this team? And to the doers, what 3 things can you share about what you're doing that will help them feel more certainty in what your plan is? All right, so this is the paused model. This is the overview of the paused model to conflict engagement. PAUSED, pausing, asking, understanding, speaking, doing, and engaging. Okay, exploring options and engaging is the E. Now, with that, we're going to start to switch our terminology. So here's my ask of you in the next week. Take those old terms, and as you see them coming forward and you start to look at your employees, go, oh, they're never going to do this, or they talk too much, or how come I never know what they're doing? Pause that thought, move it to the side. Pause that thought, move it to the side, and take a few seconds and recognize, where are they at in this journey? Where am I in this moment? Because we shift throughout the day many times in the same conversation. You should journey through all of these to get to resolution. And if there's something missing, if you're not getting to resolution, if the conflict is still existing, pause again and ask yourself, what am I missing in this journey? And how do I bring them there with me? Because you know the answers. You know what you needed when you were pausing. You know what you needed in your situation. Again, make sure you have examples that you can bring to the table for your own experiences. You recognize when you were speaking what you needed, what was missing. You recognize when you were solving problems, what you needed, what was missing, and use that as your bridge to gap that difference and to share, hey, all right, I remember a time like this too. Maybe it wasn't work related, maybe it was personal related. It doesn't matter where the example comes from. What matters is that you can connect with them and say, I see you. I recognize the feelings, and I wonder if they're the same as what you're going through. And open up the conversation. And then you build the trust. This is what we call carrying commodities. You build that carrying commodity in your people. They go, wow, he really knows me. He cares enough about me. She cares enough about me. And that builds trust, and that builds safety. That gives them information they didn't have before, and they feel validated and seen as a human being. So that is my wish for you as you move forward using these new ways to conflict engagement: awareness, identifying where you are, where they are, and then you have it in you already to bridge that gap. So let's just recap what we learned today. Why the old ways of defining conflict styles is causing roadblocks and potentially keeping you stuck. So we were talking about the old 5 ways of how we define people's engagement through conflict. And first, we started with a definition of conflict. I'll restate that here. because conflict can be a lot of things, and it can often go unseen if you're dealing with someone who's joking around or you're dealing with someone who's just doing it, because they don't really have to talk. They're just going to do their thing. They're not talking directly about it, sorry, if they're asking. Conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties, meaning the resolution, the satisfaction resolves, or sorry, the resolution and the satisfaction depends upon those two people working together. They perceive incompatible goals, scarce rewards, or interference of another in the achievement of their goals. So scarce rewards can be a lot of different things in the workplace. It might be a job position. There's only one job available and 3 people want it because they're part-time, they want full-time, or it's full-time, or it is in a new department, but only one person gets it. So it's a scarce reward. It could be a promotion. It could be financial. It might be training opportunities. Only so many people get to go on this course. So scarcity in rewards. Incompatible goals. Maybe somebody wants to focus on the relationship and somebody else wants to focus on the task. There's an incompatible goal. Interference of another party to achieving the goal. So it could just simply be that if I'm in pausing and you're in asking, you're delaying things, or there's just, I need space away and you're like trying to draw me in. So there's incompatibility of styles that will interfere with the goals. Sorry about that. And in terms of those 5 styles that we talked about, that I want you to take that terminology and just set it aside. Again, if we mapped it on here, we would have our non-assertive. So this would be your accommodators and your avoiders. We're going to switch that term out for pausing. Pausing is movement. It's not a destination. Pausing means that they will come back to the table and they can go through all of these pieces, because they can, to get to resolution. Indirect is our asking and our understanders. So we're going to, again, take indirect, put it aside, and no more passive aggressive, no more sarcastic. We're going to take those labels, put them aside, and we're going to go, okay, they're asking questions to try to understand something. I can help them move through conflict by providing them with details. Assertive, we're going to again move that label off to the side because it can cause more problems than we actually think. And we're going to just identify that what they're doing, the movement through conflict, is that they're speaking and they're sharing what their ideas are. And I can simply validate that to help them come back into these other quadrants to make sure that all of them are covered. And then doing is a new quadrant. We haven't had that before in our, direct aggression is also in the speaking and sharing. Name calling, threats, intimidation, that is also speaking and sharing, because it's directly addressing the issue and talking about it. And then the doing is a new category that we haven't had before. We don't talk about this before, but this definitely can cause tension in the workplace if we're not looking for it. So, or if we're not addressing it for those who are needing information, because doers, I can certainly think of many people in my past that I've worked with who are absolute doers. This could have been a 5-minute meeting. It didn't have to be an hour. It's a doer. You give them a task and they get it done, and you didn't expect it for 2 weeks. That's a doer, because they give a task, they get it done, they move on. They're not going to spend a lot of time focusing on collaborating because they got the answers. So with that, those are the 5 styles we want to rename so that we can get the roadblocks out of the way. We can get that label off the table and really focus on the action that they're taking to get through to resolution. The 2 questions you need to ask: are they in fight or flight? So are they moving away or moving towards conflict? And are they talking about the issue or not talking about the issue? The answers to those 2 questions will tell you exactly where they are right now. And then you use your knowledge about these 4 quadrants to build the bridge. That is how you build deeper empathy. And that is how you get the pathway towards resolution faster. Fantastic. Thanks for participating in this session today. And I hope you find that this serves you well. Any questions, you can email me, info@tammydunnett.com. Would be happy to go over anything that was not clear. And as always, make it a great day, guys.